If you are of a certain age, you may recall a show on sci-fi from the early 2000s called Battlestar Galactica. In one of the early seasons, there is a complex scene in which a junior officer nicknamed Crashdown pulls a sidearm on a subordinate who is refusing to perform her assigned mission. Crashdown threatens to execute her unless she moves out to accomplish her task. Another member of the party intercedes and murders Crashdown before the initial conflict comes to a resolution. The show excellently presents the entire sequence of events as the complicated matter it is, and today we will attempt to untangle who was right and who was wrong. Battlestar Galactica was a mid-2000s reboot, before that term became a negative, of the show of the same title from several decades earlier. Further, it could be argued that it led the charge into what became known as gritty science fiction and fantasy. Sex was common, heavy topics including genocide and torture were frequent, and they even created a word to stand in for expletives to get past the language commissars at the FCC. However, it used this grounding for more than just shock value. Rather, it was in support of what the best science fiction and fantasy has always been: an examination of the human condition through stories that are detached enough from real life so as not to engender knee-jerk emotional responses, but still familiar enough that we can appreciate the themes and questions being asked. The reboot of Battlestar Galactica was a masterclass in this, although it did get a little strange in the later seasons. Further, with the main storyline of the show being about humanity attempting to survive an AI-caused apocalypse, the series has been enjoying a timely resurgence of late. If you haven't seen the show, I'd recommend you go and do that after this. For now, I'll try and give you a brief summary. In short, humanity is a spacefaring civilization living on a dozen colonies that created robotic servants called Cylons that eventually rebelled against them. They fought a war to a stalemate, and a tense ceasefire has been in place for a couple decades. However, the Cylons are able to launch a surprise attack that decimates the colonies in a nuclear holocaust. A small fleet of a few dozen civilian ships and one remaining military capital ship try to flee. The Cylons give chase, and much of the show is about the humans trying to stay a step ahead of the machines. In a late Season 1 episode, a recon party hyperlight jumps into the orbit of a habitable planet. Unfortunately, a Cylon force is in orbit, and one of the human transports is damaged and forced to crash land on the planet. This is where our main focus will be. Several occupants of the crashed transport survive. Key individuals include Lieutenant Alex Kotaro, known by his call sign Crashdown, Chief Petty Officer Galen Tyrrell, Specialist Cally Henderson, and civilian Dr. Gaius Baltar. Eventually, they are rescued, but not before Crashdown draws his weapon on Cally and threatens to kill her. Before he does, he is murdered by Baltar. This is where the controversy occurs. Let's first set the stage for the events that lead up to this altercation. Unbeknownst to the marooned ground team, their compatriots in space have actually been able to destroy the Cylon capital ship in orbit, and several surviving Cylons have also landed on the planet. The ground team witnessed them setting up a missile launcher attached to a radar that will allow the Cylons to shoot down any rescue party attempting to reach the stranded humans. Crashdown, as the ranking officer, decides that they need to destroy the launcher to both allow their rescue and prevent their potential rescuers from dying as well. We'll discuss the specifics of the tactics of the plan later. But in summary, with limited personnel, it requires that Cally engage in a feint attack alone in order to distract the Cylons guarding the launcher. As the humans prepare their attack, they hear the sonic boom of rescue craft entering the upper atmosphere, requiring them to initiate before planned. Cally panics and refuses to move to conduct her assigned task. After several attempts to motivate her to go, and with time and manpower extremely limited, Crash draws his weapon and points it at Cally. He tells her that she can either go and possibly die on her assignment, or she will definitely die right there. However, their exchange is cut short as Baltar shoots Crashdown in the back. Crashdown's action here, although extreme, was the right decision. Cally is displaying what in military law is known as misbehavior or cowardice in the face of the enemy. By refusing to carry out her assignment, she is placing the lives of her comrades on the ground, as well as the rescue party, in danger. There is no one available to replace her role, and with the time available, no opportunity to alter the plan to compensate for her unwillingness. Unless she completes her task, the troops in the rescue ship will be shot down, and then the survivors on the ground will all likely be wiped out. It seems extreme to us in the present day, but we must examine Crash's decision in the light of the situation and norms of the universe in which the characters operate. The colonial fleet in the show is clearly based upon Western military tradition and seems modeled on an Anglo-American structure, although certainly in a more strict form than we even have today. Now, that being said, summary execution for cowardice isn't common in either the British or American militaries in the modern era. It's something these days we associate with poorly trained conscript armies such as Russia and Wagner executing their soldiers with sledgehammers. The reality is, though, that this restraint is actually a relatively new phenomena of the post-World War era. Soldiers and officers of Western militaries before this would have well understood that there would be severe discipline from superiors for failing to perform assigned tasks in the face of the enemy. The citizenry of the United States likes to think of its military forces as needing only self-motivation as well as inspiration from their commanders and appeals to higher ideals. However, military leaders of the 18th, 19th, and even 20th century were under no illusions that at times it was necessary for men to fear their superiors more than the enemy.
All this has happened before, and will happen again.
Examples of this extend all the way back to the founding of the country. During skirmishing near New York in 1781, a scouting party under the command of an Ensign Smith came under attack by a superior force of British cavalry. Ensign Smith drew his sword and instructed his men to take up defensive positions, and that he would cut down any man attempting to flee. The scouting party successfully drove off the larger enemy element. Another example comes from the account of Captain Thomas Rodney at the Battle of Assunpink Creek. Advancing with his unit under heavy fire, he noticed a man falling behind a dozen paces. Drawing his sword and threatening the soldier encouraged him to return to the line. These aren't just isolated incidents of junior officers, but rather a reflection of a policy of discipline that came from the very top of the Continental Army. General and future President George Washington constantly reminded his subordinates that they could and should execute men who fled or attempted to flee from combat, or even left their units on the march. This was by no means secret either. It was published in numerous general orders to the men, an example of which read, quote, "The brigadiers and officers commanding regiments are also to post some good officers in the rear, to keep the men in order, and, if in time of action, any man who is not wounded, whether he has arms or not, turns his back upon the enemy and attempts to run away, or retreats before orders are given for it, those officers are to instantly put him to death. The man does not deserve to live who basely flies, breaks his solemn engagements, and betrays his country." End quote. These orders seem to have been well received, and in fact, in some cases, were seen as in need of escalation. None other than John Adams wrote to a friend that the army needed to adopt the Roman practice of decimation if required. Nonetheless, Washington's officers were more than willing to put the orders into practice, as seen in the prior examples. Further, in one case, at the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in 1781, the commander, General Edward Stevens, posted several skilled riflemen behind his line of militia, with orders to shoot any troops that retreated before the order was given. The militia held its ground for an exceptional amount of time. This practice was not unique to the United States, nor unique to the 18th century. The United States continued using stern methods during the Civil War, and other Western militaries also executed soldiers for cowardice during the World Wars. The British and French executed men into the hundreds for desertion during the First World War. Canada as well condoned the practice, executing 25 of its own men for similar reasons. However, by the Second World War, it was far less frequent. The United States executed only one man, Eddie Slovic, for desertion, although many more received similar sentences that were never carried out. Canada as well did the same with Harold Pringle. Why this change occurred isn't entirely clear. There were political campaigns against the practice in Britain that banned it during the interwar period. Further, in the post-war period, it possibly came about as a broader push to fashion the Cold War as a fight between liberty and the value of the individual against the soulless and unfeeling march of socialism, collectivism, and the brutal policies of the Soviet Union. It would be interesting to examine if the corollary between strict military discipline and an inability of the West to decisively secure victory in conflicts in the post-World War era is symptomatic or causal, but that's a topic for another day. What we may be able to say, though, is that harsh measures generally were more commonly employed when the very survival of the state or the nation is at stake. Back in the universe of Battlestar Galactica, the situation is even more desperate. The survival of the entire species is at risk, after having been reduced to a population of just under 50,000. Even prior to this event, military law on the colonies can be assumed to be relatively permissive to this sort of punishment. This is evidenced when Admiral Kane tells Commander Adama that she has summarily sentenced 2 of his men to death.
I am a flag officer on detached service during a time of war. Regulations give me broad authority in this matter.
Indeed, the aforementioned Admiral Kane is the main player in yet another instance of summary execution. Shortly following the Cylon attack on the colonies, her ship is ambushed on a raid. Rather than retreat, she orders an attack with which her XO disagrees and refuses to comply.
Mr. Belzen, are you refusing to carry out my orders?
Sir, I cannot in good conscience obey them.
Mr. Belzen, give me your sidearm. Colonel Fisk, you are now my XO. My order still stands. You executed.
This is the XO. Launch all remaining squadrons.
In one sense, that situation was even less valid than the one Crashdown was involved in, because Admiral Kane had a path open to withdrawal. Yet, despite the shock of her command staff in the moment, and third-party listeners later, none of the characters actually questions the validity of the action itself. Rather, it is simply used as information about Admiral Kane as a person and leader. In fact, from all information available in the show, Kane was respected and even loved by her crew. This even fits in with the fabric of our own history. Leaders such as Patton, while sometimes criticized for certain disciplinary actions, were soldiers, and beloved by the troops under their command in spite of, and perhaps because of, their severity.
But I've been going through Kane's logs, and from a tactical perspective, it's hard to find fault in anything that she did, or the Kindred did.
Now, there will be critiques of using Kane as supporting evidence, given some of her other morally questionable decisions. Even without her, the show presents other examples, one of which is Captain Lee Adama, who orders one of his NCOs to draw her weapon on Samuel Anders when he attempts to leave on the Eye of Jupiter planet, as the Cylons advance on their position.
Are you kidding me? You gonna shoot me now?
Can't let you go. I need you on the line. I need you commanding those civilians. I'm sorry, Sam, but you cannot go.
So what are we gonna do now? Follow me around with a gun? Because that is the only way that I am not going after Kara.
There are several key takeaways here. One is that the NCO has zero hesitation in pulling her sidearm to prevent Anders from leaving. This implies it's a not uncommon method of preventing cowardice in the face of the enemy. Furthermore, Anders isn't even in the military. He happens to be a civilian working on the planet alongside them who has been pressed into service. If the threat of deadly force to ensure compliance for a forcibly drafted civilian is acceptable, then that same method surely is valid for a trained and experienced soldier such as Cally. There is another example. In Season 3, Chief Tyrrell, who is a key player in our current story, incites a mutiny in protest over working conditions. This includes having the deck crew of Galactica ceasing to support flight and maintenance operations, which are critical to the security of the fleet. Commander Adama wastes no time threatening and even taking the initial steps to begin summarily executing those who are refusing orders to work unless they return to their duties. Tyrrell and the mutineers relent, further evidencing the necessity of this strict form of discipline at times.
Are you aware that your deck gang is participating in a work stoppage?
It's called a general strike, sir.
It's a mutiny. The men and women on this ship are not allowed to disobey an order, especially in support of some kind of fracking labor dispute. And do you know what we do with mutineers? We shoot them, Chief. Arrest Cally Tyrrell. Take her under armed guard directly to the starboard repair bay. I'm gonna put her up against the bulkhead and I'm gonna shoot her as a mutineer. She's a ringleader, so she goes first. Then the rest of your deck gang. Figursky, Celix, Pollux. Understand me. The very survival of this ship may depend on someone getting an order that they don't want to do. If they feel that orders are sometimes optional, then this ship will perish. But I will put 10 Callys up against the wall to make sure that this ship and this fleet are not destroyed.
Now that we've established the validity of Crashdown threatening deadly force against Cally, both in the Galactica universe as well as our own, let us revisit the specifics of the situation and the individuals more closely. We'll start with the main characters involved. First, with the man who ended up murdering Crash, Dr. Gaius Baltar. In the broad scope of the series, he is one of the most complex, dynamic, and well-written and acted characters. An entire video essay could be devoted to breaking him down. However, in this particular instance, and with the exception of him shooting Crash, he actually plays a fairly small role. His botched recon of the radar site leads to Crash forming a plan based upon faulty information. Further, his cowardice, a recurring theme in the series, sees him publicly object to Crash's plan until he is finally shut down by Chief Tyrrell.
Absolutely not. This is not a democracy. Well, it's not. The LT's in charge. The LT's in charge. No ifs, no ands, no buts. He say we go, we go. You need to sit down and shut up right now.
Nobody tells me to shut up. I'm the vice president.
Sit down and shut up right now. Your briefing, LT.
Chief Tyrrell, on the other hand, has a more significant position, both in the unfolding events, but also hierarchically. He is the senior NCO. The exact definitions and distinctions of the roles and responsibilities between officers and NCOs are probably as numerous as the number of officers and NCOs that have ever existed. Nonetheless, broadly speaking, officers assume overall responsibility for planning and decision-making. NCOs put those plans into action, as well as providing subject matter expertise, ensuring welfare and sustainment of the troops and equipment, and crucially, ensuring discipline is maintained. It must be emphasized that no member of the ground party are experts in close combat operations. Crash is an electronic communications officer. Cally is a maintenance specialist. And Tyrrell's primary role aboard ship is as a deck chief overseeing fighter maintenance. However, all of them are soldiers and sailors first. Those terms are used interchangeably on the show, which means, like in our world, they all still receive basic combat training. Just like the saying about how every Marine is a rifleman, every soldier, regardless of specialty, still qualifies on their weapons each year. Akin to the situation in the show, war is chaotic, and you never know when you may need to act as an infantry squad to defend your lives and position. Similarly, Tyrrell is an NCO before he is a deck chief. However, even prior to this, his record on the discipline front has been quite spotty. Tyrrell engages in a relationship against regulations with an officer, and then continues that relationship even after it is discovered and ordered stopped. He then goes on to lie under oath during an investigation. This pattern of fraternization continues as he engages in a budding relationship with Cally, who, in this case, is his direct subordinate. The two later marry and have a child together. Additionally, he undermines Crash by sarcastically commenting during his briefing, and then objecting and questioning Crash during the climactic encounter. Further, Tyrrell should be on the same page objectives-wise as Crash. While the duties and responsibilities between officers and NCOs are distinct, at the small unit level, it's just a single bullet that stands between the senior NCO having to assume the officer's responsibilities. Tyrrell, to his credit, is focused on the welfare of his troops, but unfortunately, to the exclusion of almost everything else. There is actually an interaction where Crash has to address his failure to understand the larger picture.
LT, a word in private.
Out there, they're programmed killing machines.
We don't have any choice. Galactica will definitely be sending a search and rescue party. It's just a matter of time. And if we don't take out that launcher...
We can't go up against an armed and defend a position like that.
I don't want to attack the launcher either, but it's our duty. We owe it to the rescue party, and we... Maybe that's why I'm an officer and you're not. Dismissed.
On its surface, this sounds exactly like the kind of annoying thing a junior officer would say to an NCO. The reality, though, is it is Crash accurately correcting Tyrrell's behavior, which, for a very brief time, has some impact. The failure to be the primary enforcer of discipline is what eventually leads to Crash having to assume the responsibility himself. It's another reflection of actions that are common in our own world.
All this has happened before, and will happen again.
During the Civil War, at the Battle of Antietam, a Union soldier named Frank Holsinger remembered seeing another soldier start to flee from the field, and the NCOs not taking any action. Holsinger recalls the commander, General Meade's actions. Quote, General Meade rushes up. Whipping out his saber, he deals the man a blow. He falls. A lesson for those witnessing the scene. I felt at the time the action was cruel and needless on the part of the general. I changed my mind when I became an officer, with sword and pistol drawn, to enforce discipline by keeping my men in place when going into conflict. End quote. This failure to effect control, both personally and among his troops, let indiscipline fester, both on the planet and on Galactica as well, where he was the senior NCO aboard ship. This is exemplified by no better a person than Cally herself. She's a case study in what happens when standards aren't upheld and there are no consequences. Not only does she refuse to follow orders on the planet, she then encores with other notable actions. These include shooting a handcuffed Boomer in cold blood. You can debate whether this is murder or not, since Boomer was a Cylon, but she is then only given 30 days in confinement for an unauthorized discharge of a firearm. This is then followed up by blackmailing Baltar, who, for all his flaws and failings, is still the vice president of the colonies, into doing what she wants.
He helped you. He didn't tell anyone what you did on Cobalt. What you did to Crashdown.
You blackmailing me.
Help the chief. Help yourself, Doctor.
This all stems from her own cowardice, and a failure of her NCO to ensure that standards are maintained. She is afraid to engage Cylons that might shoot back, but will shoot an unarmed prisoner. With no serious repercussions for her violations, she then escalates things further. That being said, the failure by Tyrrell to enforce discipline is only one piece of the responsibility for Crashdown's death. The rest lies with Cally, for her cowardice and the selfishness of expecting others to sacrifice their lives for her with no reciprocation. Finally, we arrive at the man himself, Crashdown. He's a minor character, so there aren't a ton of scenes with him prior to this. From what we do see, he's generally a good guy, being jovial with Boomer as her ECO during their missions together. He also displays bravery, courage, and loyalty on numerous occasions. One of those actually happens to be when Sergeant Hadrian comes to bring Boomer and Chief Tyrrell in front of a tribunal. He moves quickly to defend them from being detained. Eventually, after Sergeant Hadrian explains her actions under regulations, he withdraws, demonstrating his discipline in abiding by the rules. On the mission, after the ship is struck by Cylon fire and the pilot killed, he rapidly tries to guide the ship down to a crash landing, and then risks his life to ensure everyone aboard evacuates before it explodes. Once they've escaped, he quickly assesses the situation, understands the immediate objectives, and begins giving clear directions to the survivors. Tyrrell does attempt to provide advice on occasion, as a senior NCO should. Crashdown, depending on the moment, incorporates or discards it. First, when Cylons are heard entering the atmosphere, they leave the downed ship without accounting for all their equipment over Tyrrell's objections. Without us knowing the time between when the sonic boom of the Cylon craft is heard and when it would arrive over them, it's difficult to assess whether this was the right call. However, when rescue raptors arrive doing the same thing, it's a very short time frame, and given the stranded party is out in an open field, the decision based on the available facts seems correct. Later, when they realize they need a medkit left at the downed ship, Tyrrell advises Crash that he can't send one man, and Crash accepts his advice. This indicates that Crash is willing to take his NCO's input into his assessment, but that he recognizes it has to fit into the larger picture. The fact is, though, that on the big decisions, Crashdown has his eye on the ball. As we have stated previously, his role as the officer is to assume responsibility for the mission and its planning. He correctly assesses that the mission is to get his party in the best position to be rescued. When they learn that the Cylons have constructed an anti-air launcher, he refines the plan to attacking the launcher so that they can both be rescued as well as prevent the deaths of their rescuers. When making the plan for the attack, Crashdown follows the Army's troop leading procedures with almost textbook precision, to the point that Tyrrell makes a snide comment about how by the book Crash is being. The reality, though, is that it's textbook because it works. Crash receives his mission, makes an initial plan and movements, conducts recon, and then finalizes his plan and issues the order. He even builds a cute little terrain model, so shout out to whatever military advisor on the show added that detail. We even get a scene where we see Crash reflecting on his responsibility for the lives of the men and women in his party. He understands the weight of it. Therefore, when he orders Cally to conduct a diversion against the Cylons where she might die, he's not doing it flippantly. He's demonstrated that he's willing to risk his own life for others, and therefore not asking her to do something that he wouldn't do himself. Further, despite the immense pressure from everyone else, he has the courage to hold fast to accomplishing the mission, even if that means threatening Cally's life. This moment is where one of the other key controversies occurs. When they arrive to attack the launcher, it is guarded by more Cylons than expected, because of Baltar's faulty recon data. Tyrrell wants them to move a half-kilometer away to see if the radar site is less guarded. However, they then hear the boom of friendly craft entering the atmosphere. Crash assesses that there isn't time to try to move to the other location, and that they need to follow through with the original plan. This is the correct decision, especially in light of how fast the Raptors are fired upon by the anti-air launcher. Moving half a kilometer tactically through broken forested terrain would be very slow going, and when they arrive, they have no idea if that new location is less defended. Critics might say that since they end up blowing up that other site, it was the right decision to move. My counter would be is that it's one of those scenes that strains credibility. The team, after shooting Crashdown, comes under fire from the Cylons. They then manage to move that 500 meters while under automatic weapons fire from multiple Cylons. Despite the show having demonstrated, on multiple instances, the real danger of Cylons firing in full cyclic, the party, with more than a bit of plot armor, arrives relatively unscathed and then destroy the radar. Another critique that is leveled at Crashdown is his demeanor during the ground operation. This relates to the pressure we referenced previously. Crash is feeling the weight and responsibilities of command. and it does bleed through into his military bearing. It's understandable, though, and despite the apparent signs of combat stress, it doesn't actually influence his decision-making and steadfastness to make the right decisions at key moments.
Never had much use for people who second-guess my decisions, especially if they've never held a command. They don't understand the pressure.
The final criticism that can be leveled is why doesn't Crashdown take on the risky responsibility himself rather than have Cally do it? That's because Crash is again making the right choice as mission commander to place himself with the main effort, which is the team assaulting to destroy the launcher. Cally's assignment is a supporting effort to demonstrate and feint an attack in order to disrupt the Cylon disposition, and while important, not the most critical point. What seals the deal in this entire thing, though, is that upon the rescue ship landing, the ground party all lie about what happened. This is clearly not to protect the legacy of Crashdown, but rather their own failings. We know this because Cally later threatens Baltar that she'll tell the real story, meaning that the truth is more a threat to the survivors than to Crashdown, indicating that the survivors knew that they were in the wrong. There is a motto in the military: mission first and people always. The situation on the planet exemplified the conflict that those two goals can oftentimes have. What's key is the order in which they come. The mission comes first. While it must be done with people always in mind, the people can't come at the expense of accomplishing the objective. Crashdown understood this, and although he valued the lives under his command, he understood that they would have to be risked. One of the characters in the show commented on Crashdown's death that he died in the finest tradition of the service.
How did Crashdown die?
Leading the charge. He gave his life in the finest tradition of the service.
On that, I would agree, and hopefully this video brings some small justice to Crashdown.
To BB. Jojo. Jolly. Crashdown. Riley. Beano. Dipper. Flat Top. Chuckles. Shepherd. Dash. Flyboy. Fireball. Stepchild. Puppet.
To all of them.
So say we all.
So say